A group representing residents of retirement villages is furious about delays to changes to the 20-year-old law. The Associate Housing Minister Tama Potaka has confirmed a long-awaited review of the Retirement Villages Act will progress, but says any amendment bill won't be introduced until the next parliamentary term. The review began under the previous government, with consultation last year attracting more than 11,000 submissions. A range of issues had been raised in an earlier white paper by the Retirement Commission in 2020. The Retirement Village Residents Association says the current law gives residents a raw deal, with fine print forcing them to pay ongoing maintenance costs for units they don't own, even after they move out. The Retirement Villages Association, which represents owners, has welcomed the Minister's announcement on the timeline and process, saying the review is focusing on the right things and balances the rights and responsibilities of operators and residents, while ensuring ongoing viability of the sector. The Minister, Tama Potaka, will be with us in a moment. But first, Di Sinclair sets out the concerns of the Residents Association. Morena, Di.
Oh, good morning, Catherine.
So the announcement came out from two ministers last week. What's your reaction to the delay in the timeline as you see it?
Well, we're very grateful to the Minister for progressing this. Our United for Seniors campaign called on the government to address the very areas the government is now honing in on, and so that's good. Our big concern is the government's timeframes. Catherine, every week 130 New Zealanders move into a retirement village. If you take out the ones that will go into new units, you're left with 3,770 people per year who will die or move out before this new change is enacted. And it's just not quick enough. You know, we appreciate the government has a full agenda and resources are stretched, but the coalition has shown themselves to be one of action. And up until now, agreed deliverables have been consistently completed within the rolling 100-day timeframes. And we think that this issue deserves to be resolved far more swiftly than is proposed.
How long have you and others been asking for this review?
Well, I think we're into our seventh year now, so it's been an awful long time. It's estimated that by mid-2027 there will be almost 1 million retirees in New Zealand. Now, of course, not all of them are going to go into retirement villages, but a good proportion of them will. And we just don't want this new tranche of people coming into the villages signing what could possibly be, which have proven to be, contracts riddled with unfair clauses. It's just not right.
What reason have you been given, if any, for the fact this will now take until the next term for legislation to be ready? What reasons have you been given?
Well, it appears the only reason is that there's an awful lot on the government's agenda, which we acknowledge. But, this is important. As retirees, we don't have the joys of lots of time left. Time is of the essence for us. And what I want the government to understand is the demographic with which they're dealing. We're talking about people in their 70s, 80s and 90s. And it's just so important that we get this sped up and have a bit more urgency put into it. They've agreed to do it. We don't understand why it can't be a priority.
In terms of speeding up, have you been given a timeline previously for this from officials or others?
Well, yes, originally we were told it could be done. Now, when the Labour government first introduced it, we had a timeline that it would have been in this parliamentary timeframe. But it appears that, and look, I understand there's a lot of other things happening, but we've been working on this for years and years now, and it's just becoming so disappointing.
So it was ministry officials who initially told you it could be 18 months to 2 years. That's going back to late 2022 when things started.
Well, in 2021, the Retirement Commissioner Jane Wrightson said that the review had to be done. It was urgent, and that was in 2021.
There are complexities to this, though, and let's just remind us of the main concerns that residents hold.
Well, there are three key issues, and they're the ones that the review has honed in on. Is the repairs, who pays for the repairs and maintenance of the owners' chattels? Last year, the Commerce Commission investigated 12 operators and expressed serious concerns that residents were having to pay for repairs and maintenance of chattels that they did not own, water cylinders, carpets, etc., etc. You don't own anything in a retirement village. You have a license to occupy, and the things that are there when you arrive belong to the operator. There's no way that the residents should be paying for repairs and maintenance of those chattels.
So that's one, that's a difference. You're not covered by the Residential Tenancies Act, so that would be a difference with other forms of, tenancy and right to occupy, obviously different things. But in principle, you're arguing that's not fair. What are the other one or two biggies?
Well, the other biggie is complaints and disputes. Unlike other sectors like retail, rental or banking, we don't have an ombudsman or external power that residents can turn to. It's just an elderly person making a complaint about an operator in a position of power, and sometimes to that very same person. Unfortunately, the complainant often feels they're in a very vulnerable state, and in some cases, unfortunately, Catherine, it results in bullying of the resident, and that is just not on. And the third big one is the repayment of the capital sum. We're asking for the capital sum to be paid out in a timely manner when a resident leaves a village. The law as it stands has no mandated time frame for the return of the money when exiting a village. And in some cases, this can take up to 2 years because the operator will not pay out until the unit has been relicensed.
So you're seeking a limit? You're seeking a limit on how long that can happen for?
Well, we would very much like 28 days. And
right. I think the Retirement Commissioner talk about 3 months or 6 months or something like that, I think. But either way, people are talking about the need for a limit, yeah?
Yes, and the RBA is talking about maybe we'll pay you some interest after 9 months.
Okay. So are you confident from the overview the Minister's released when saying, yes, this review would progress, but on this timeline? Are you confident that these matters will be traversed in the review from here, which, to quote the Ministers, is focused on the areas of highest importance?
Yes, I believe that it will go ahead and it will happen, but we just want to push the time frame out, or bring it in. Actually, it's just not good enough. I mean, you think of all these people that are over the next 3 or 4 years that are going to be moving into retirement villages and signing up to unfair contracts.
You're the complaints manager with the Residents Association. What kind of volume of complaints are you still dealing with?
Anything between 5 and 10 a week, covering an awful lot of different things, from the easy ones that can be sorted out at manager level to ones that require a huge amount of input and help and support, and legal input as well. So there's all sorts of things. It's just a mishmash of different things.
Thank you, Di. Stay with us. The Associate Housing Minister is Tama Potaka. Tēnā koe I te minita. Thanks for your time this morning. So this review's been years in the making, as we've said, got underway a couple of years ago now. The call from the Retirement Commissioner prior to that even was that these changes were urgent. Can you explain why it'll be next term before this legislation?
Well, what I wanted to acknowledge up front is that retirees and kaumātua are a critical part of our communities, and around 15% of New Zealanders over the age of 75 live in around 500 or so villages. So the majority of kaumātua live outside the villages, but there's a very core, important group of retirees who live in villages and under negotiated contractual arrangements. The matter around timing is very important. It's very important for those that live in the villages and their whānau, their families. And there's been some very strong advocacy, but there are a lot of complex issues that we have to work through. It's pleasing to me, though, that many issues have sort of been agreed to. We've got a lot of broad support across the villages and operators, and now we've got 3 issues that we've narrowed down on.
On what matters would you say there is already agreement across the board? Could those matters be progressed more quickly?
Yeah, things around an easier-to-read disclosure statement and the contractual arrangements, improvements to code of practice, stopping fees when a resident vacates unit. There's quite a number of topics that have been given some broad support across most of the operators and also the Villages Association and the Retirement Commissioner. I think we've got quite a bit of spaces around chattels and fixtures, dispute resolution processes and capital repayments when people move out. But that's why we've identified those as the three key issues to focus on in this next stage of the review. We do have a lot of sequencing across the legislative agenda that intersects with property, such as our Going for Housing Growth, our resource management reform, fast-track arrangements, and certainly it's important for me as the Associate Minister for Housing to keep progressing this matter in a timely manner.
So is it the case that those officials are just too overworked on other matters to do some of this quicker?
I think, look, there's a pretty full legislative agenda, as our colleague from the Retirement Villages Association has mentioned and observed. But we'll progress this in a timely manner, and with some officials who are very dedicated in doing their jobs, many of whom have been involved from sort of the early days of this current review.
Is there no way to move more quickly on things like maintenance repairs of owner-operated chattels and fixtures? Does it have to be one big bang amendment?
Well, there are a number of issues that were brought up during the review. We've narrowed it down to three, and there are some changes that would be required to the legislation and then the code that applies here. Certainly, some operators might be interested in voluntarily making moves in that respect, but that's up to them. And for us, it's just working through what are not insignificant and not simple issues to a really a durable solution. Certainly it's been 20 years, but now we're into another phase. What
are the bits that are not simple? We've heard from the association representing the owners that financial viability could be at risk here, especially for smaller operators. So
Absolutely.
what are the bits where you believe there's more to be worked through? What are the bits that are complicated?
Well, let's take capital repayments as an example, Catherine. People move out of villages and into aged care facilities and elsewhere. Of course, some folks, retirees, pass away while they're in the village, and then usually an operator will need to sell the unit to generate the funds necessary to pay back the residents or the next of kin or the executor. And there's been quite a bit of contention and debate over the capital repayment terms, how fast that should happen, whether or not it should happen, if the unit has been sold or not, whether or not there's an interest delta that can be addressed along the way. That's not a simple set of issues that can be worked through. And of course, those that don't have the type of liquidity, those operators that don't have liquidity to pay residents back after they move out, do have a bit of exposure. What I'm very keen on seeing is a very functional and effective retirement village operator environment. And if we force too harsh terms on the operators, then it makes it very difficult for some of those operators to continue to be sustainable.
So what is your thinking at the moment on how long is reasonable to at least begin paying some interest on funds that are being held?
Now, what I observed, Catherine, is that often those funds have not been held because that unit needs to be sold. So I don't have a firm view, hence why we're continuing to undertake the review to land in a space where we can get the balance right, we can ensure that all voices have been heard on that issue and we come to a durable solution.
What's the situation with where things go from here on the question of capital gains and whether any capital gains should at least in part be shared upon sale? Is that off the table from listening to you?
There are some operators that continue to maintain a more traditional model around capital gains, and there are other operators who actually have come to the view that capital gains should either be retained in full or retained in part, such as Potaka Pines. It's one operator that's operating steadily around the Tauranga and South Auckland areas who have a very different arrangement. So there's a bit of diversity within the operators when it comes to capital gains, amongst other issues.
But there's diversity, but I'm not hearing clarity on whether or not it would be a live matter for your review as to whether that's fair or not, those terms.
Well, that's not part of our core three issues at this time. We've got chattels and fixtures, dispute resolution and capital repayments, which our President has just commented on. Those are the three issues that we are really focused on.
And finally, the other matter that's long been a matter of contention, but I don't hear in here, is the deferred maintenance fee. I think it can be as high as 30% or so. That's not part of your priorities at this stage either for review?
No, that's not fallen within our priorities at this time. We're continuing to focus on those three issues, which we've both mentioned on the call today, and look forward to engaging with not only the retirement village residents and operators, but also the Retirement Commission, who's been a very strong advocate for this review and for change.
The terms and conditions, the fine print, and the complexity of being able to get complaints dealt with, do you believe, again, that all of these matters are covered in the brief that you're working to from here? Because you've just made the point, they can vary from operator to operator. And is it satisfactory? And second, is it clear enough to people what they're buying into?
Well, the first thing I'd observe is that there is a lot of detail and fine print in the contractual arrangements that are entered into by residents and operators, and often residents have the opportunity to engage with not only the whānau but also lawyers to help them understand the fine print.
Some lawyers have said they've struggled to understand it, Minister.
Yeah, yes, I acknowledge that, but certainly there's a level of broad support around making things a little bit more standardised, easier to read disclosure statements which reduce duplication and length. And certainly there has been some genuine support, particularly by the larger operators. Don't forget, 6 of the operators look after over 2/3 of all the units in retirement villages as well. So certainly they have a large influence over the industry and the standardisation of these contracts.
The industry itself, the Owners Association points out, it says around 75% of villages have already voluntarily adopted many of these industry reforms, and our ambition is to bring all villages up to the same standards. What about the other 25%, however, Minister?
Well, I think that there's some room for evolution in that space, and I think the hope of many villages, and they've conveyed this to me, is that the remaining 25% do move more quickly to ensure that there's more standardisation and simpler contractual arrangements. I think it's until that time, there's some room to move. We're focusing on the three issues, though.
The point that Sinclair made earlier for the Residents Association, that perhaps half of the current retirement village residents will either have died or moved into aged care by the time this legislation gets passed. Your comment?
I'm not completely across that detail, noting that there are around or nearly 400 New Zealanders over 75 and around 55,000 of them residents in the 500 or so villages across New Zealand. I'm not completely across that demographic detail.
Yamahino, thank you for your time. That's Tama Potaka. Thanks also for Di Sinclair. And a statement from the organisation representing the owners. We were speaking to Di, who represents the residents, and they are frustrated at what seems to them to be a slowed timeline for this law change. Retirement Villages Association, Michelle Palmer, is Executive Director. We're pleased the government stated its commitment to balancing the rights and responsibilities of operators and residents and ensuring the ongoing viability of the sector. The key priorities the government's identified align with the sector's commitment for improvement. New Zealand's retirement villages sector has been proactively rolling out the most significant forms in a generation for the past 3 years under its blueprint for improvement, which include ensuring operators relicense vacant units as quickly as possible, providing greater clarity disclosure around moving into care, stopping weekly fees once a unit's vacated, paying interest on outstanding capital sums after 9 months, and more clearly defining chattels, repairs and maintenance responsibilities. Around 75% of villages have already voluntarily adopted many of these reforms. The RVA agrees improving the complaint system is possible. Currently there are multiple channels and that can be confusing. The industry is open to looking at alternatives if there is sufficient evidence that they work.